So, everybody's here or getting here. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome here on Tuesday, October 10, in Rotterdam for the program The Creative and Cultural Sector and the Ecological Transition, New Perspectives and Models. A joint venture of Institut Français NL and also de Paris and the Nieuwe Instituut. My name is Maurice Seleki and I'll be your host today. During this program, leading European creative organizations and practitioners share new perspectives on the key role which the cultural and creative sector can play in the ecological transition and also the global climate crisis that we're facing. You will meet these inspiring guests during several panel talks and also in workshops. We hope to make it a very interactive program, so please feel free to join the conversation today, but remember, everything you say can be used against you, because everything is recorded. But before we start, let's see quickly what's boiling in our audience. Let's see. Who of you is working at a cultural institution? Please raise your hand. Cultural institution, okay. And who of you is working as an independent maker? Okay, that's the other half of the room. Are there also people who are worried about the current climate crisis? Okay, that's almost everybody here. Okay, that's great. Almost. So there are people who are hopeful. Is there somebody who is not worrying about the current climate crisis? Yeah. Okay. Who of you thinks the cultural and the creative industries can contribute to addressing that crisis? Okay, lots of people. But also some people who don't raise their hands. So you don't think that the cultural sector can play a role? Interesting. Maybe we can change that perspective today with our program today. But that's like a little bit measuring the temperature in the room, so to speak. But let's start with the first speakers of today. It's a great pleasure to introduce them to you. A big applause for the director of Institut Français NL, Mr. David Béard, and the general and artistic director of the Nieuwe Instituut, Mr. Arik Chen. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome at your own event, I must say. David, to start with you, why is it important for Institut Français NL to organize this event?
Thank you. Should I take it?
I can serve you.
All right. So hello, everyone. So first of all, thanks to all the speakers that came from France, from all over the Netherlands, and from London. Thanks a lot to our partner, Nieuwe Instituut, which is a very important partner for the Institut Français, with several projects that are under development with them. And thank you all for being here. So why did we want to do this event? So our role as Institut Français NL is to build bridges, to foster cooperation between our two countries in every field. When it comes to climate change and cultural industries, the whole project stems from the idea that in France we always speak, when the cultural sector is concerned, we speak of a cultural exception. It was even part of the discussion, when we had this trade deal between the EU and the US. The idea is that when climate change is concerned, there is no cultural exception. Cultural actors, what's interesting, and there was a report by an organization in France called the Shift Project that did a specific report on this, showing that the cultural industries are both responsible for their carbon footprint and that they should be actors of change, but that they're also vulnerable to it. That when there is, for example, as it happened lately, an energy shock, and that the energy bills are going through the roof, then the cultural actors are the first victims of it. So the idea is that these actors are really in the center of it. Also, cultural actors who are more than 6 million all over the EU are interdependent and intertwined with all the sectors of the industry, starting with tourism, starting with urban development, but really all sectors. And the idea also to the program we have this afternoon is that cultural industries and artists can be really pioneers in imagining new ideas, to find solutions, to adapt, that they can also be great ambassadors when it comes to shaping and reshaping the demand, changing the way our populations live their cultural practices in a more reasonable way. Also, the need also to slow down sometimes.
Make less, maybe?
Exactly, to renounce some of the things we do, but also do things differently. So the whole idea behind this project we did with the Nieuwe Instituut was really to also give the floor to the artists and to try to find out what comes out of it.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for that great answer. Eric, going to the Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam, what's the urgency with your institute to organize this event?
Yeah, sure. Well, your question was, I think, why do we do this event? And we do this event or these kinds of events because it's what we do. Now, why do we do what we do? And I think this applies to everyone in the room, everyone in the cultural and creative sectors. And I was remembering earlier this morning that a little while ago now, I was contacted by a well-known, and to put this in a Dutch context now, a well-known Dutch politician. Now, it says something about how old and boring I'm getting that I'm talking to politicians now and then. But he had requested a meeting with me, and I wasn't really sure why.
Can you disclose the name of this politician?
Jesse Klaver.
Oh, we know him. We know. Of GroenLinks. Green left.
I didn't know at first, and when he first emailed, my colleagues were like, "Oh my God, just Jesse Klaver," and I was like, "Who's that?" But so I asked him, what he was looking for when he came, and he said something along the lines of, we have a lot of challenges, problems, things that we have to really face, complex issues we have to face, but what we're missing is a vision. So I'm going around to cultural institutions now to see, what visions we can find from this sector. And I thought that was just, first of all, as an American, I cannot imagine an American politician ever saying that, but it really impressed me, and it was a good reminder, I think, of the role that we serve in addressing these many challenges that we are all facing, that designers can provide that imagination to articulate new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of being, new ways of seeing and acting. To build on what David was saying, of course, there are some problems that design can solve, but I think the bigger questions are not problems that can really be solved. So to go even beyond solutions, because as we all know, many solutions have knock-on effects. They have unintended consequences. Many solutions only create more problems. One person's solution is oftentimes another person's problem. So within this complexity, who are the people who can really begin to think of new ways of navigating this, new world views and ways of not just shaping the world per se, but shaping how we interact with the world. And that is all of you. So that's why we do what we do.
Thank you so much, Eric. And then David, because if you seriously think about all things that we're saying here, then you can be pretty sad because. Like Eric said, some solutions only create more problems. Are you still hopeful, also in relation to today, that the cultural and creative industries can really contribute?
Yeah, no, I think we are really at the beginning of the path. Within the cultural industries, some of these industries are just at the very beginning of the thought process of trying to reinvent what they do. If you take, for example, festivals, there are so many in France and the Netherlands. It's really only starting to be part of their priorities. So our idea, I mean, the idea with this afternoon is to participate in the beginning of this discussion, also to build bridges between artists and scientists, which is something also very important that we will try to do. The idea also is that this afternoon will be the first part of a cycle, that there will be also other events that we hope to do also in partnership with the Nieuwe Instituut and other actors. We hope also to be able to give some takeaways from these different workshops, to publish a summary of the discussions, and also to share this with the French and the Dutch administrations, so that it becomes also part of the institutional cooperation between France and the Netherlands. So it's really a kind of a long-term process that we're starting and making these connections and see where they lead. Yeah.
Okay. And Eric, giving us a mission statement for the coming hours. What do you want to give us?
Yeah, well, I think
it's our task.
I think all of us are at a lot of these talks here and there and everywhere. They are very important, but I think we can all sort of notice that we often tend to sort of talk in circles, right? And a lot of the same things are said over and over again, if only in slightly, if perhaps in slightly different ways. So I think I think it would be great if this talk and future talks can kind of raise that baseline conversation a little bit. You know, there are certain things that we know already that maybe don't need to be repeated. We know everything's horrible and we have all these big challenges and so on and so forth. Let's try to raise that baseline, and it would be great if maybe everyone who's here tonight either says or hears something they haven't said or heard before that takes things even just a little bit further.
That's great. Thank you so much. Raise the baseline. David Bejaag and Eric Chen.
Thank you.
Let's start with our first panel. It's a panel in which we discuss the state of affairs, the background and the challenges with some esteemed guests from different organizations. Firstly, give it up, please, for the director of the Institut Français de Paris, Errol Ock, Mr. Errol Ock. An applause, please. Errol, take a seat. Secondly, the co-founder and artistic director of Huiden Club, a new space for contemporary culture, and also of the sustainable design fair Collectibles in Brussels, Liv Vosberg. Welcome, Liv. And the director of the Dutch Research Institute of Transitions, also known as DRIFT, Mr. Dirk Loorbach. An applause, please. Welcome, Dirk. And the curator, programmer, and founder of art space Motormond, Musuke Nalwoga. Musuke, welcome. So great that we have you here in the panel, because in the coming hour or a bit, we're going to talk about the state of affairs, about the background and challenges of this eco-crisis and what the cultural sector can actually do. But let's listen to a little bit more about yourself. Errol, let's start with you. Can you give like a little elevator pitch about your work, what you do?
Okay, I'll try to. So I'm Errol Ock, I'm French, and I'm the head of the Institut Français in Paris, which is a government body in charge of, let's say, promoting cultural, artistic, and intellectual exchanges all over the world. Not only for French culture, of course, but also, you know, improving our relationship with other cultures. So that means we are also in charge of promoting mobility for artists and cultural projects, audience. The physical link between audience and artists is very important for us, especially after the pandemic. It could mean that we could sometimes be in contradiction with, as a professional and as a citizen, because as a citizen, of course, I'm very aware of all we already, and we will be talking about, of course, the climate challenges that we are facing. Just a few words to say that in my previous job, I was head of the director of the Picasso Museum in Paris. So my job was to promote, great exhibitions of Picasso all over the world, gathering people coming from many places. That also may have an adverse cost for the environment, of course, in terms of mobility and those big cultural events. And in my even previous job, I was in charge of digital economy. I was the deputy chief of staff for the Minister for Digital Economy in France. So my task was to, promote like an unconditional growth of the French digital economy. So also this has an impact on the environment and on climate change, of course. So you see, there is this contradiction.
Do you feel guilty about of those previous roles?
No, but I think what's important is to have in mind that I have to avoid this contradiction. I have to transcend this contradiction, and I think that the aim of the roundtable is to think how the cultural sector and the digital sector as well can contribute to can be a tool to change the mentality, can raise awareness, and also take very concrete action. So this is what we are concerned about, and in my daily life as a professional, I have this in mind. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Errol, for this elevator pitch. Liv, can you pitch yourself too?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Liv Weisberg. I'm half Dutch, half French. So I guess I'm making the link between the Institut français and the Nieuwe Instituut. I'm a serial fair generator. I've been creating quite a few art fairs. And I also created a Haydn Club 3 years ago in Rotterdam. So it's hard to describe myself because I'm having a lot of hats. So today I only have 2 hats. But I think where I would like to intervene today is really in the events. Because working in the fair sector, I'm seeing a huge amount of waste and pollution and people traveling. And myself, the worst, I think I have the worst carbon print of the whole room probably because I'm going to a lot of different fairs and events and Biennale all the time.
By plane?
Yeah, I mean, I also work for Art Rotterdam. I'm doing the international strategy and development of Art Rotterdam. And for example, we're no longer allowed to take the plane if we can take the train. And 2 weeks ago, I went to Berlin for the Art Week, and the train was full. And because I booked too late, and I took the plane, and I was so guilty. I was like, I didn't dare to tell them that I took the plane. But I thought it was, for example, as an organization, I think it's very good that we are not allowed to take the plane if we can take the train. So this is. I don't know.
Yeah, this was a short introduction, but thank you, Liv. We're going to talk about more about also the projects you do. Dirk Loorbach, can you give an elevator pitch too?
Sure. I'm a local, so I'm from Rotterdam. I'm a professor at the university, which is on the other side of the city. And my group Drift, we're a group of action or activist researchers. Some colleagues find us normative and unscientific because what we do is we try to join people that are pushing the boundaries, basically, and by working together to accelerate just sustainability transitions, we also learn a lot about how it works, where the resistance is, what holds us back, why we are not changing. So we use basically theory to create space for transformation, which is also where culture and arts comes in. I was involved last year in the Architectural Biennial, which is an architect show that happens every 2 years in Rotterdam. And what we try to do...
Also here, right, in the Nieuwe Instituut?
Well, next year it will be here. Last year it was in the Ferro building. It's on the west side of the city. What we did there is really try to explore the nexus between this transitions research, or let's say the transition movement in society, which is very diverse and broad, and the role of architects, designers, arts and culture. And we'll come back to it, but it all boils down to us collectively helping society to move out of this fixation on technological innovation, on progress as improving what we already have, to recognize what's already there or what's maybe lost, and how we can find that back.
Thank you, Dirk. You also brought an image with you, a slide. Is that something that you want to show now?
There was an online slide deck, and someone said put in a slide. I don't know.
We have this. Is this?
It's yellow. During the architectural biennial, we had it on a wall 7 meters wide, so people could stand in front and put a dot on it to position themselves in it.
Yeah.
The short summary is that a transition is a fundamental disruptive process of system change. In society, it takes decades. But it's a very fundamental evolutionary pattern that's found in physics, in ecology, in a lot of different academic disciplines. And in a societal context, basically we're all human, so we like our routines and we build up an interest and we don't want to change. So we are stuck with improving what we already have. But as the context changes, and climate change is a changing context, it forces us to adapt. And at first we resist, but it becomes harder and harder, and ultimately we have to let go, and things will stop. The flip side, and that's the bottom left, is that individuals are always able to escape from the norm or from what is normal. And those are the entrepreneurs, the change makers, the activists. And over time, a transition basically is when the context pressures become so high that business as usual cannot be sustained, which creates space for the new to emerge. And it creates, and we are in the Netherlands stuck in the middle in a lot of areas. It creates massive societal unrest, uncertainty, because the future is basically starting to look bleak for a lot of people. So it's a source of populism, of regressive forces. People lose hope. Which is exactly the moment where also sustainability transitions can happen. But we need to recognize the possibility, and we need to embrace also the uncertainty and the process of making the new without having certainty where we will end up.
Thank you, Dirk. An interesting explanation also about this slide, and also the word institutionalization, especially today when we have 2 institutes organizing this event. But let's.
Yeah, but they're still on the top left.
Yeah. Okay. But you also talked about the new and emerging and experiment, and that's like a little bit of a bridge to our 4th guest, last but not least, Musuke Nalwoga. Musuke, you are the founder of Motormond. Can you tell us more about your project and what you do? Because you are one of those new voices.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm a new voice. I've been around for like 6 years, but anyways. So what I do, I'm an independent curator, and sometimes I liaison between institutions and Black communities. And usually I am working outside of institutions, or usually I bring my own team into institutions. And recently, the turn from diversity and inclusion to sustainability think is happening within the museum sector at least. And right now my research is thinking, okay, how do we take the knowledge and the equipments and the way of working together we've learned during the diversity and inclusion popularity, or like trend you could call it, and continue to apply it as we think sustainability within the exhibition space. And anyways, so I have an exhibition space in Amsterdam. Yeah. It's called Motormond, and it is indeed doing, how can I call it? It is doing BIPOC art for BIPOC immigrants within the Dutch scene. And it is really thinking about the concept of like decentering European methods and decentering European understandings of art history, exhibition making, and all these type of things. And one of the things that we try to do is to think our exhibitions not only through content, but really as logistical drivers of given ideologies. industries, right? When we think about the concept of sustainability, we are really thinking, okay, where is the money going? How do we reuse the things that we are reusing? But also, how do we, as a small outside institution, kind of like encourage and nudge at the edges of the industry to really encourage it to change, right? Because right now we are doing a lot of exhibitions, right? Most institutions have, I don't know, 70, one of the highest number of exhibitions I know in Amsterdam is like 70 exhibitions over a period of 3 years. And I'm like, can we do circularity? You know, what is the possibility of one exhibition per year? One that has a modular function to it, but one that doesn't need so much production and so much erasure and building and repetition and this type of things. But simultaneously, I must also think, how do I bring the marginalized Black community along, right? So which language am I using? Which artists am I engaging to actually make sure that this diversity and inclusion does not become like a scientific research in a corner where I will not call it community, but where the everyday person is not engaged.
Okay, thank you so much for this short elevator pitch on your project, and it sounds very interesting, and also combining those very important themes of diversity and inclusivity and the sustainability quest that we're all in. Errol, back to the Institut Français, with the Paris Climate Accord of 2015 already in mind. Can you describe actually the urgency of the ecological transition that we as society in general, but also the cultural sector as part of that society, have to make?
Okay, yeah, we are at the Institut Français particularly aware of this urgency. Since the Paris Agreement in 2015, progress has been made, but not that much, and we know that we are still very far from the initial objectives. We are, as I said, a government agency, and one of our the main supervisor is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was the one dealing the Paris Agreement. So they are in charge of the negotiations on climate. So as an agency, a public agency, we have to be exemplary in a certain way. So, and this is all the more true that since we are in contact with a lot of other institutions, cultural institutions, either publicly funded or privately funded, artists, of course, also ICCs in general, I would say, and of course we have a lot of we have a very big network with the local Institut Français, as the Institut Français in Netherlands, and of course their local partners. So we have a very large amount of contacts, and like a possibility of benchmarking also to see what are the good practices. And I said that we have an obligation to be exemplary and to act in an exemplary way as regards climate awareness, I would say.
You're talking about benchmark. That's interesting. Is that like a real CO2 impact monitor, or what kind of a benchmark do you mean?
I mean that we can see a lot of practices. For instance, we can see what I don't know, a theatrical company in France would try to do to implement. We can see innovations on certain fields. We can see also we are, some of our network members. They tell us that when something interesting is being done by a local, I don't know, it can be a dance company, it can be an artist who has an initiative. We see a lot of things, and we try to, circulate the good practices. We also, I will speak about that later, we try to include in our own policies the environmental criteria, of course, because we know we make, we call for projects, and we insert the criteria now in our projects or in procurements as well. So I think that we have our day-to-day practices, of course, as an institution, but we also have like an advocacy policy. Since we are in contact with so many institutions, we may have, let's say, a word in saying what we think is important in the cultural sector. So we are convinced that the cultural sector has something to do.
Yeah.
We know that some countries, maybe they have started earlier than France. The UK, for instance, has done a lot of things in the recent years. We are starting to catch up with that. And of course, as we're in the middle of foreign affairs and cultural institutions in France, we think we may have a sort of leverage to act on that.
So it's a special role and also a special responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's a good
summarization.
Yeah, summary.
Yeah. Okay, Dirk. Also, because you're the professor in the room, the official professor, can you describe the urgency of the transition from the perspective of Drift? Because climate.
Let me also respond to. I mean, sustainability is mentioned now a couple of times. I mean, for me, the urgency is not in the climate crisis, but is in finding a new development model. And what we see across society, and especially in politics and business, is that sustainability is about sustaining what we already have and are doing and making it less bad. So across all sectors in society, this is the model. We spend a lot of public money to sustain an economic model that is basically unsustainable.
Because it's based on growth and...
On growth and extraction and colonialism and on making money with money that accumulates with the people or institutions that already have money. And it's literally unsustainable. So the urgency from a transitions perspective is in recognizing the unsustainability in what we are doing. And it's not that everything needs to go, but we have to start by what does need to go or what cannot be sustained and think about how we can let go as society or as institutions or as individuals. We don't have ways to deal with that in society because everything is fixated on innovation and on accumulation and making new stuff. But we also have to recognize what it is in the context that makes us focus on new stuff and on solutions and on innovation all the time. Also in the cultural sector. And it was mentioned by Arik, I think, already in the beginning.
Yep.
A maker wants to make. You get a subsidy for exhibitions or shows, and you need to attract more audience. And you want to make new sceneries and new... So there is a tendency of making more and new all the time. So the urgency for me is in ways to recognize what is unsustainable and to be able to collectively imagine through doing what would be truly just and sustainable. And we have to figure that out. And until we let go, we're never going to move in that direction.
So just like a deeper urgency than most people are seeing.
Yeah, so that's maybe lifting the baseline or trying to do what Eric is saying. Right. I mean, I'm also concerned about climate change. Yeah. But the fascinating thing is that, I mean, I've been concerned about climate change my whole life, basically. And people have been concerned way before. So that's not the driver for change. The question is, why aren't we as a society responding to it in an adequate way?
Okay, yeah, interesting. And of course, you can see this from different perspectives, but the urgency that we try to put in is from the Climate Accord of Paris and the goals of 2030.
But you see the same. I mean, it's great that there was a political compromise, but ever since, all we have done is use a lot of public money to invest in carbon accounting, carbon offsetting, more negotiations, more climate summit, more research into the climate problem. So it's a good way to sustain the status quo. It's become part of the problem, I would say, the climate science and climate negotiations.
I see like a circle above your head behind you, and it reminds me of the donut of Kate Raworth from the donut economy. Is that like a model that you're talking about, a new model to see
Yeah, the interesting thing is even in economics, finally things are starting to change. So you have the degrowth movement, you have the planetary boundaries concept, the donut economic, the circular economy. So the alternative narratives of how we can organize economy. So that's gaining strength, and we see that combined with a lot of local practices that actually show that it's possible to have a regenerative food system, or to do a cooperative energy system, or to have local trading networks, or to build with bio-based materials or in a circular way. So in fashion you see this whole movement. So for our basic needs, it's become possible and imaginable that on a large scale we truly become just and sustainable.
Okay, that's a good cue to go to Liv, because Liv, you're of course in the cultural sector with your fairs and also with Haydn Club now. How do you see the climate crisis and the urgency of that crisis from your own space, from Haydn Club? What are you doing there?
Yeah, it's very interesting listening to what Dirk was saying, because I also recognize a lot about how, I mean, I was thinking also collectible, because we are gathering a lot of designers, and we always try, I mean, like everyone, I've also been concerned about climate change and how we can do things better, but are we really making an impact? That I don't know. So, for example, the Haydn Club was conceived as a temporary space initially, but it seems that we can stay. And the architect, Thomas Dirks, who created the interior design and the walls, has been really working on using panels that are not cut. So they are standard panels. Everything is screwed and not glued. And the entire construction of the Haydn Club can just go back to being used somewhere else, or not everything, but really the majority of what has been used. Also, the furniture were all commissioned to young designers. Our furniture in the restaurant, for example, were made by Jonas Lutz, who's using trees that were fallen in Rotterdam. So we try our best in our level. I'm also not a climate change or expert, so it's really from my cultural entrepreneur perspective. We're trying to do as much as we can. And for example, when we have exhibitions, you will this afternoon meet our curators of our exhibition in February about also those issues, design sediment. But the curators have also been calculating our carbon footprint. We're trying to work with designers and artists that are regional, larger region. But this also creates a challenge, because we want to show different voices. So how does it work if you want to ship works from far away? And that becomes quite tricky. And by preparing the workshop I'm giving this afternoon, I was checking, I didn't know, for example, how much the different shipping options are being calculated very differently. Different type of boats and ships and all this, which also I realized around me, most people don't even think about that. Gallerists at my fairs, curators, when they choose an artist, they will not see how, you know, it's not really taken into account by a lot of people.
And Mutsuke was telling us about the production. You know, if you make new things all the time, 70 exhibitions in a couple of years, and you continue that practice, then nothing is going to change. But it's also the nature almost of the creative sector to produce new things. That's why makers are there, to make new things. How can you solve that problem?
I mean, because when I think about it, I really like the thing you were saying about, because when we think about like exhibitions, right, and the infrastructures that allow us to make exhibitions, and the infrastructures that allow us to kind of like hold given artists within our institutions, and these infrastructures inadvertently need us to kind of like push out as many exhibitions, as many publications, and to kind of like have a revolving door of people. But I think it is also kind of, it's hard to argue for seeing what is not sustainable and stopping to do it, and then only doing what is sustainable, right? This kind of like balancing act, given the fact that this responsibility would almost leave the larger institution and fall on the, for example, a museum to be like to see, okay, what is sustainable and what is non-sustainable and how can we stop doing it, right? In order to argue for that, you would need to kind of like change the funding infrastructure to kind of like catch what is sustainable for you, right? You would need to change the advertisement model, right? How the community imagines themselves to be advertised to within an exhibiting institution context, right? So one of the things I have learned, I have done a 2-year stint, a research year, and a 1-year experimental exhibition within one of the new fashion museum that is kind of like trying to do sustainable fashion and communicate that and do it from both a technical and social perspective. And when you talked about this idea of, oh, we have done the carbon footprints, we have counted the amount of train rides or the amount of airplanes we are taking, And it's super interesting because we've seen the science, right? But then what role can culture play? Because culture is very interesting in that it knows how to communicate emotionally. And this is something which people haven't yet gotten, right? We are not yet emotionally connected to the planet enough to worry about its sustainability in meaningful ways, right? So I feel like a well thought through like cultural agenda, cultural policy, which really needs to happen it cannot happen at a lower level. We can kind of like lobby, but it needs to happen really inter-institutionally, right? Inter-regionally, where we think, okay, what is sustainable and how can we make people feel that this is important enough for quite large steps to be taken within the cultural industry to move, yeah.
Thank you, Matsuke. You mentioned the infrastructure and also cultural funding as part of that infrastructure. And also, El, you also mentioned the UK because they are in some ways further with changing cultural policy. For example, the Art Council England, which supports organizations and individuals in the creative and cultural sector, have a special environmental policy and action plan in place already since 2012. They became the first cultural organization in the world to make environmental action a funding condition. And I know that Mr. Loorbach, Dirk, you were in the Commissie Duurzaamheid, Sustainability Commission of the Raad, the Board of Culture in the Netherlands, and you actually advised that maybe sustainability conditions should be conditions for cultural funding. But the government didn't really respond to that advice. Can you elaborate on that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, it was called Cultuur Natuurlijk, but we tried to do exactly what you're saying, identifying that.
Presented also here at the Nieuwe Instituut.
Presented here, well, actually in the Depot, so I don't know if that's competing, but it's across the street.
Okay.
But so we made. 2 arguments. One is in the sector itself, there needs to be a much harder push for sustainability. And a lot of institutions like musea and theaters and companies are saying, we have to work on diversity and on inclusivity and on digital and now sustainability. And we said, well, deal with it, because it's a political commitment towards circularity and climate neutrality. So it's going to happen to you anyway. And we said, at least start with the baseline, calculate your footprint. But if you're if you claim to be progressive, you have to be much further than that. But at least start there. And we recommended the government to ask all institutions to at least disclose their environmental impact, which they said they are not ready for yet in the current funding round. But the second part of our advice was much more on the systemic nature, saying there's a lot of individual and small-scale makers and two are here, that are operating from a different value set. They're not reducing carbon, but they're trying to take responsibility for their impact on the environment, including also the social environment, and they want to have a positive contribution. And that doesn't happen magically overnight, but they're in the process and using creativity and creative entrepreneurship to do that. But they're working individually on the bottom left of my curve, while all the institutions are still part of what we would call the regime, but all the funding structures, the sort of dominant culture. So what needs to happen is that there is an institutionally supported, government-supported process within which the cultural sector starts to seriously engage at a systemic level with its own transition. And they could see it also as an exercise to develop the capacities and competences to also help then other sectors in society to do the same kind of thing.
To be really pioneers.
Yes, but to pioneer on a collective, in a collective way on a systemic level, which is also not necessarily the nature or the culture of the creative sector.
Okay. Interesting. I hope that you're still here because this is a little bit cultural policy about on stage, and talking about cultural policy, but also maybe compare what's happening in the Netherlands and also in the UK with the situation in France. Is there also a discussion in the French cultural sector about maybe changing the whole system? And making sustainability like a funding condition, for example?
Yeah, this is something we have ourselves started to consider. I said that we introduced the criteria of sustainability in some of our, call for projects that we fund. This is not exclusive right now. This is not, it's taken into account, but it's not the only criteria, of course. But this is something that, because we think we have to train progressively the institutions or the cultural actors we're working with to that awareness, because some of them are not, and it's not always depending on the size of the institutions, because you have big institutions in France that are aware of the situation and try to change the way they see their activity, and we have small actors with very, very different approaches. Some of them are very aware of their impact, and they try to almost to base their activity on that conscience. Others are very small and they say they don't have the means. So we have a very, very, I would say, differentiated picture. So we try to work with all of them. So this is not very easy. We have not made that compulsory. It's taken into account, but it's not. But we have discussions. I participated to a conference organized by the Ministry of Culture with all the public cultural institutions in France related to the ministry, and the issue was how can we exactly implement the sustainability objective in our current activities. It's difficult to have a general discussions because the situation was quite different according to the sectors. For instance, the stakes were not the same for a museum or a big museum or a small company, etc. But still, there is a common ground. And I think I said that we have a...
Because you were in the past, you were a museum director also, or you worked at the museum?
Yes.
Musée Picasso.
Yeah.
Just to make it very concrete, is it possible for a museum not to program so much exhibitions, like the example Masuke was giving?
Yeah, of course. It's something... I've been director between 2013 and 2019, so I think maybe the awareness at that time was not as
big as it is now.
It's and it's a good thing that it's raised in between. But we had already these considerations. Well, but there was other issues. There is the financial issue, of course, because organizing exhibitions is also a question of resources, and this museum was funded only partially by the French state. So the rest you are being asked to find your own resources. So you have to organize exhibitions. exhibitions, which is one problem.
Because that's part of the business model.
Yeah, I mean, but the business models can change, but it takes some time, and you have to convince the stakeholders that this can. But we started doing this because there was also such an amount of exhibitions in the world that sometimes it didn't make sense anymore. And there was also the digital way to see things, because some museums started to think, okay, well, we should calm down on organizing physical exhibitions of the works because of the costs, because of the environmental impact. So okay, we may think of something else, but this has other problems. These kind of exhibitions have also adverse effects on the environmental. But still, we started. But it was maybe I couldn't say right now because I'm not working in the museum sector anymore. But I think I've discussed with some museum directors in France, and they are trying to think of exhibitions that can be that don't have to travel. That can be just they just send the plans, the maps and the project, and the other museum can do it by itself. So it's and there is no more travel or very, well, there are things to be imagined. Also, when you send the artworks, you can make there are different ways to make them travel, etc. So this is something new. We, for instance, we are in charge of the French pavilion at the Biennale in Venice, architecture and art. And we have started a program with the aim of reducing the emissions of the pavilion, because there is a lot of things we can do. We started discussing with specialized associations, NGOs that explain to us how we could and we make it like a compulsory thing right now. So, but this is taking some time, I would say.
Okay, time and that's ticking, and so that's also a part of the problem. Everybody needs more time, but we have less time. And there's also another different problem, and it's that we're talking about the European context now. So in the Holland, in France, Belgium. But there's also the global south, and also the connection with other parts of the world, and themes is climate justice, for example, because the victims of the climate crisis are actually already there in other countries in the world. So there are people actually dying because of the climate crisis, and people in the Netherlands tend not to really realize, maybe. But what do you think? Do you think that in the cultural sector people are aware of that responsibility, maybe also towards audiences elsewhere?
This is super interesting, because right now some of the work that I'm doing is to actually try and see if you could call it like diaspora communities. So if you think about Moroccans here, right? So like what type of emotional, financial, economic support could they be, or even political lobbying in terms of the type of economic actions, the type of like climate policy making that is going on within Morocco to kind of like try and lobby for like a safer Marrakesh, a safer, right? So like one of the things that culture can do, and I think we kind of like keep really overlooking it, but the strongest thing that culture does is make people move with their emotions, right? So if you really want to create a connection between people in diaspora here and other diaspora communities around, specifically I focus on Africa, but you could kind of like activate bonds, right? And through these bonds, there is an exchange of knowledge, right? A bringing of researchers, a connection to artists. For example, the Prince Claus is doing a very good job here in terms of like African architecture and this type of exchanges. And it's super important because as we think through climate change, we cannot simply think Europe, right? We have to think much broader. And in order for these like little steps to start happening, there needs to be some sort of emotional connection, both to the land, as in Africa, and the Europeans here, but also the people, right? I have to be able to get worried when Shell burns up down a forest in Kampala because I'm connected to these people, right? So this is why like an international and kind of like pan-diasporic lens is also important in our thinking of like sustainability.
Okay, thank you. Liv, last question before we go to the audience over here. And I think we can all conclude that, or not conclude, but we can say this is a pretty hard topic. But Liv, do you see like somewhere some chance to improve faster?
Improve faster, I don't know. I think it's really important, this awareness, and also because it made me think a lot what Dirk was explaining. I work at different level. I have to say, for example, my fair collectible, it's my own fair. I can do what I want with it. So, for example, since the first year, the scenography, I identify this as one of the most polluting aspects of the fair. And we ask as a condition to do the scenography to almost 100% create no waste and reuse the material. But if you think of bigger fairs, I was making research for the workshop of this afternoon I'm going to give. Art Basel said in 2019, Art Basel is the biggest fair in the world. They said, we're using no longer plastic for our Horeca, like restaurants. We held a conference in 2019, and they reuse most of the walls. But you realize that this is nothing. I mean, if you also think of all the installations that are put in front of the fair, one was reused, but there's still, I think, for the bigger organization, very slow realization. And they think if they do little touch-up here and there, that's okay. And I think there's a much more, but I also see a generational shift because, for example, Dirk was also saying, I see a collectible, the young generation, that it's not even thinkable that they would create works that are not deeply and seriously, not greenwashing, but are actually really sustainable. And last year, we have a curated part called the curated section that was curated by Leo Horta that you will hear later today. And Leo really impressed me during the selection because he actually went to look at every single item that was proposed and pre-selected by the jury to look if it was truly sustainable and truly deep down the way it was created and made by the designer versus just a gimmicky or shallow or greenwashing. And that I found very interesting, but that's on the maker, really individual. But if you think of companies, I think there's a lot of greenwashing and a lot of shallow, things that are not really a change.
Okay, so the next generation, the Zillennials, they are the new hope. We're going to talk with some of them later on in the program. Dirk, maybe because you're like.
Should we go to the audience or?
Yeah, we're going to go to the audience, but still one more question for you, because you are like the scientist from outside of the cultural sector, and everybody here is working in the cultural sector. Is there some chance that you see for the cultural sector?
Yeah, you present me as professor and scientist, but I'm no expert on the cultural sector, so that's then you are the experts. One point responding to what you're saying, I think the developed economic model is successful because it creates individuals that are disconnected from nature and others and are turned into consumers. And I think the cultural agenda or revolution that you're talking about is that we are educated again in a developed economic context, that we are actually part of nature and that we are connected to everybody else on the planet. So, and that, making that visible or tangible, I think for me would be at least one big part of the solution. So the transition thinking is it needs to get worse before it gets better. And the interesting thing, what we learn from history, is that we see now that we have the mix of ingredients that could produce a non-linear shift into a completely different future. So all the ingredients are there to move to something completely different in 10, 20 years on a global scale. But I talked about what's holding us back. It's lack of imagination, it's lack of guts, of leadership, of funding or institutional support. But all those conditions are building up. And I look at the cultural sector and creatives and makers and entrepreneurs in that space to help build this critical mass around a positive transition.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to the audience. Are there some questions or remark from the audience for our esteemed panel? Maybe, do we see somebody over there? Yeah. I think you are Klaas Kuitenbrouwer from the Nieuwe Instituut, right?
I am. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. I had actually touched upon what Derek Lorbers just said, but also what Musoka addressed. The Institute of the Individual is particularly strong in the cultural sector. The individual artist, the individual designer. So this is actually not an advantage of the cultural sector. It's actually an obstacle. Please respond.
Oh yeah, but I think that's exactly what we said, right? Given that we are looking for collectivity, right? But I would even say before we even get the individual and combine them to other individuals, we maybe need to get the individual and connect them to the planet, right? And then I feel like the connection between each other is going to come afterwards. Yeah.
I really recognize it, but you could say the cultural sector is also a victim of this economic model, but also because it wants it. In this conversation, we hit a lot on this idea of the autonomy of the maker. So makers don't want to be instrumentalized for society or for a societal purpose. We see younger generations taking up climate and connection to nature or just transitions as a theme. So they do that individually, but there's a big resistance against collaboration or being socially engaged for a collective purpose, because it might give up your authorship. And that's a cultural transition that the cultural sector has to make in itself.
But this being said, I want to say that I see that there is still some kind of group pressure. The fact that all those individuals, they still, I mean, I cannot see any young graduate from Eindhoven now going to work purely with plastic and waste. This is sort of also group peer pressure. And I notice a lot of people putting themselves in collective and working collectively more and more. So there is still a sort of consciousness, helping each other, at least with the young generation, that is quite strong.
And Errol, do you also recognize that in France?
Yes, I had discussions with graduates from design schools or art schools, and they were basically saying more or less that, which is individually I could not do something else because now I'm aware, I'm convinced of that, and collectively it's also like a collective obligation, because you feel they don't want to be involved in being obliged to do this, but they feel that there is a peer pressure, but a positive one, saying that okay, the situation is so incredible that we as artists or future artists, we do have a responsibility to do something. And so there is still this collective pressure, which is not an obligation, but something, so they wouldn't think of doing something really different from that. And we started thinking maybe we could help more the projects that deal with the environmental awareness. And we thought, no, because the artists don't want that. They don't want to be obliged to, so we didn't do that. But there is and I think we did well not to insist and say you will get more money if you talk about the environment. It's not what the artists want, and we respect that. But I think from the younger generation, it's starting to build by itself. So I think that's interesting. But in France, that's what we saw. But
in the second panel today, we're going to hear some examples also and talk with makers. Is there some other question or remark from the audience? Yeah, let's go to you.
Hi, my name is Antonia Wormer from Blademate. I have a twofold question. I heard that a very interesting remark about the role for the cultural sector and individuals or collectives within to form the vision and to change to really establish ideas and pioneering developments for a real paradigm shift for economy, society, etc. For that role, I have the question that how could the cultural sector and the institutions help these pioneering individuals to take it one step further and not only show or inspire, so not only give the platform and the inspiration, but also make it really, give it hands and feet to make it practical, to really make it work in society and make it big. And also I heard for if you have design interventions, for instance, or cultural or artistic interventions for societal issues, then those could be seen as solutions for problems that we created, but do not really contaminate a paradigm shift. But still these solutions might help to flatten the curve until we are ready for the paradigm shift, which you address takes a little longer. And also there, the pioneers often come with really great solutions. Like for instance, I said I'm from Blademate, and Superuse Studios came with the invention of reusing end-of-life wind turbine blades from the energy transition. But the energy sector doesn't think of the end of life of these blades. So we make it big to make it as an industrialized solution, and that should be done on countless design and cultural interventions. And who would do that?
Okay, let's start with the first question. Do you can somebody answer that question? So that was how we can give a platform.
I can say something about how we're trying to do it. So I heard it in the opening as well. We need vision. I don't really know if we need more visions or inspirations or inspiring images or that's always nice. But the real point is that we need visioning as part of a different development model. So really imagining alternative futures as a way to build confidence, to recognize what's possible, and to think together about how the next steps could be taken. And one of the things that we also developed in the Biennale, but we're working with now, is transitieateliers, which is basically about bringing radical transition practices together with experts, scientists, lawyers, governance expert, a business model expert, or an engineer, and creatives and creative entrepreneurs and artists, so that they collectively discuss a radical transition in a sector or in an area. In that process, they imagine, and we call that backcasting, what is truly just and sustainable in this context. What would the energy system look like? What would be a just mobility system in Rotterdam? And then go through a process to make that very concrete. Where is it already happening? What would it mean at street level? What would the neighborhood look like? What would it mean for users? For what kind of vehicles or infrastructure do you need? So it's the process of envisioning, bringing together these forces from the culture sector, from social entrepreneurship, and from, let's say, action research, and to try that out as a new development model. Okay. I don't know.
So a transitieatelier. That's one of the possible solutions. Working title.
Yeah.
Okay, I think because of the time, the second question is probably the last question we can answer. Summarized?
That's all, but there's another one because I think that the second question may be answered with the answer of the first question.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to go to the back for our last question from the audience.
Ooh, can I hold it myself? Or hi, my name is M.A. I'm an urban designer. And I was wondering how you see the role of education in this transition process, because you talked about autonomy of the maker, and I feel that there's already in your education from a young age the urge to differentiate yourself from others, like a sort of a competition element, I guess. Also in the way you're tested, etc. And how do you see education in this whole story? Like, should that also be changed, and in what way?
The role of education. Maybe Errol, is that something for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we started our own internal process of working together on what can we do for the environment at our level, we started talking with the younger of our teams, staff, and they were clearly the most aware on these issues. Some of them already did, the habit of calculating their own footprints, etc. So which we're not doing. But the question is wider. Is how do we start? Let's say. Taking the collective issue into consideration and not helping people to differentiate from the others, and I think it's very difficult. We know in the individual aspect is very central to the education. It should not be like that. I think there's a balance to find. It depends on what education we are talking about. Is it general education or is it artistic education? Is it history? But it's true that I think. And it relates to also what Dirk was saying about when we will be able to educate people in the knowledge that they are just a part of something bigger and that they are a part of a collectivity, a part of a community or something. In France, for instance, it's very difficult because we don't recognize the communities as it's so we say there is the French Republic and there are the individuals. So it's very difficult because we are trying to we have to bridge.
You have like égalité, fraternité, liberté, right?
Yes, it's a very beautiful catchphrase, and I believe in that. But it's true that the sense of belonging to something wider than individual is something that we have to give to our children. So, I have a very young girl, daughter. She's 8 years old, and I'm trying to convince her, but it's not easy because they look at the advertising, they look at there are so many contrary forces, strengths against that. It's a day-to-day work, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. I think it's a great point of view over here, but also to thank our esteemed panel for their contribution. So maybe give them a warm applause. So Errol ook, Liv Weisberg, Derek Lorbach en Matsuke Nawoge. And from this point of view, we're gonna continue with a short introduction of our workshops, because then we're gonna go over for a break. Because after the break, we have 4 workshops for you. The first is of Klaas Kuitenbrouwer. We already heard him. He is a researcher at the Nieuwe Instituut with a workshop about the innovative ZOOP model. And that's an organization model for cooperation between humans and other than human lives that serves the interests of all life. Very interesting. Secondly, the workshop towards more sustainable cultural events by Liv Weisberg. We already know who Liv is. And you can discover new ideas and best practices on developing more sustainable cultural events and more specifically art and design fairs. The third workshop is about the Moving Matter Lab and is given by designer Basse Stitgen. Explore ways to transform collected materials while maintaining in them a sense of space and belonging, and much more. And the fourth workshop, Reinventing the Garden, will be given by Fanny Noël and is about a variety of gardens and creative practices about what gardens can provide to humans. So very interesting. You see those 4 tokens. During the break, you can choose one of the 4 tokens to select which workshop you will participate in. The workshops of Klaas, Liv, and Basse will start at the 6th floor. Hopefully the elevator works, and otherwise it's a great workout for you. And the workshop of Fanny starts here in the auditorium and all workshops starts at 3 o'clock. So you have a short break time. Have fun. Thank you so much. Entering later on this afternoon, but in the first part of the program, we talked with the directors of Institut français and also the Nieuwe Instituut about the whole urgency of this program. We also had several guests in our first panel talk, and of course, there were workshops, 4 workshops that just ended a couple of minutes ago. People are still entering from that workshops. And now we're going to continue with our last panel talk of today. And that's a very interesting talk because we're going to talk with makers and creators, designers with their best practices and very concrete solutions or maybe the start of solutions. But when I look around, I see that we miss some of those makers still, so we cannot start. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, okay. Let's introduce them to you, all the guests of the second panel talk. Yeah, my text. Yeah, firstly, designer and co-founder of Atelier Luma, Henriette Waal. A big applause, please. Secondly, the curator in the Design and Industrial Perspective Department of Centre Pompidou and also co-curator of the upcoming exhibition Design Sediments at the Huidenclub, Olivier Zetoun. Okay, almost here. But we have the co-founder of social design initiative Resolve Collective, just trained in from London, Akil Scafé-Smith. An applause, please. One more time, the introduction for Olivier, because he just came in. He's a curator in the Design and Industrial Perspective Department of Centre Pompidou. It's very creative. And Olivier is also co-curator of the upcoming exhibition Design Sediments with special effects at Huidenclub. And last but not least is artist and also co-curator of the upcoming exhibition Design Sediments at Huidenclub, Leo Orta. Guys, if I can call you that, guys and girls. But esteemed guests, maybe it's good because I introduced you very briefly, but if you can give us one more time an elevator pitch about your work and what you do, so we know a little bit more. So, Akil, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Akil Scafé-Smith. I'm one of the co-directors of Resolve Collective, which is an interdisciplinary design collective. We work between art, architecture, engineering, and technology to address social issues. A lot of the work that we do revolves around a design philosophy, which we call using the site as a resource, which means to appraise and to revalue not only local materials, but also local knowledges. My background is in urban design and in architecture. I teach at the Architecture Association. I teach undergraduate architecture at the Architecture Association. And we were also the fellows at Nieuwe Instituut in 2021, which seems like a very long time ago. We're honorary fellows at the Royal Institute of British Architecture, and we've had exhibitions at a number of different places across London and the UK, but also Europe. We do a lot of work across the world, from Portugal to Palestine. And so our work takes us to lots of people's locals, and we learn from those places.
Thank you, Akil. Very impressive. Akil, from Resolve. And Leo, maybe you can give us an elevator pitch.
So I'm Leo. I'm a British, Argentinian, and French artist, but also designer. I've studied in the Netherlands at the Design Academy, and after graduating, I also co-founded a duo and a collective called Morph. And today, I also work as an independent curator through Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, and I try to incorporate like the let's say my generation of artists and designers, so millennials and zillennials, into trying to bring voices up front.
Thank you, Leo. And because you're from 1990?
93.
93, yeah. So you're pretty young still. That's interesting because we're gonna delve into that. Henriette, maybe you can give your elevator pitch.
A bit older.
A little bit older.
Yeah.
Just like me. Can you give
Sure.
your elevator pitch?
Sure. I'm an artist, a designer in 2016, I co-founded Atelier Luma, which is a lab in the south of France, which develops bioregional practices. So, with the surrounding region of Arles, which is the Camargue, I'm interested in all the work I do in the relationship between people and landscape. I'm also artistic leader of a very new lab in the north of the Netherlands, which tries to link design to the Dutch peat meadow program, which is all about like CO2 emissions, housing crisis, like biodiversity crisis, all crises together. But it's very interesting also to bring back the knowledge that was developed in France over the years here. And besides that, I'm also teaching a Masters of Social Design in Design Academy Eindhoven. And at Luma, Atelier Luma, sorry, I go a bit back and forth, but we're going into a new phase, having just opened like our new building. We don't see the images, but hopefully we see them later. And I'm working on how to also translate what we've learned in the bioregion of Arles and the wetlands of the Camargue to other places in the Mediterranean and develop projects, for instance, in Egypt. You will see some later about this. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about eco-transitions.
Thank you, Henriette. Olivier, can you give us your elevator pitch?
So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for being here to the Institut Français. So my name is Oliver. I'm Associate Curator at the Design and Industrial Prospect Department of the Museum of the Centre Pompidou. I'm also an independent curator and writer. My research evolves at the intersection between I would say art and design through the scope of the digital field, the digital cultures, and the living, more specifically. We have been working from our department at the Centre Pompidou on a set of exhibitions, on curating exhibitions that were dedicated mostly to nature and to the living, especially through the scope of the arrival of biotechnologies and new relationships to, I would say, biomaterials, bio-based materials we'll discuss. And so we have worked on different type of exhibitions and writings, and this was both at the Centre Pompidou but also in other Centre Pompidou, like in Metz, for instance, in the east of France, and also in other antennas in Brussels or in Shanghai internationally. So yeah, thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you, Olivier. Henriette, let's go back to you because you already told us that you're a tutor of the Master Social Design at the Design Academy Eindhoven, where Leo, where you studied. Did you study it with Henriette or under, or did you?
I think later generation.
Later generation, yeah. Did you taught maybe? Leo?
No, you didn't do social design.
Henriette, the climate crisis must be like the supreme social design challenge for your students. Can you say something about how design students are addressing the eco crisis in their work?
I think you cannot generalize, but I can give some examples. Like this year, for instance, we had Daan Overgaag, who did a project called Seeds of Resilience, and he collaborated together with the Dutch seed bank to make to grow forgotten vegetables, and to he cooks also with them, and to kind of it's a project that is about seed resilience, about biodiversity, and I think really interesting that also this collaboration happened with the seed bank and also the knowledge they have, and that I'm proud in the masters that we make that happen, these collaborations with the real world. So we try to avoid projects that just happen in the school, and then other project, maybe it's a project from a few years ago of Sun Lee. Often people that subscribe to the masters, they already have a practice. So in Sun, for instance, she had a fashion company that was quite successful, very talented, and she earned a lot of money with socks that were just part of the polluting fashion problem, and she wanted to use this master to renew and to transition to other ways of designing clothing more in symphony with nature. So I think it's interesting that we, with the master, we try to facilitate these kind of transition periods with each individual designers. So we don't have a fixed program. So each year, the group decides what the program is about. So they bring in their topics.
And because there was a question of one of our participants here about the role of education in solving or contributing to the addressing of the climate crisis. You say the program isn't fixed, but is this a theme that you see every year? So the climate crisis, is that a thing that is in the program because the students maybe are fixed on it?
Yeah. I think it's really coming up. I try also to in the first year of the masters to take students with me in situated in one of my projects, because it's often very complex what you need to learn about a place or about a certain landscape to be able to actually design with the problematics, because it's so complex. I think that's very important also, in a question for schools also, how they learn their designers about ecology.
Yeah. Leo, you graduated in 2019 at the Design Academy. Can you describe that sense of urgency among your generation of students?
I think with the media flow and all the information that we receive, we automatically have that sort of autocritical point of view as students. In my position, I have that guiltiness also sometimes of using certain materials when knowing what it has as an impact on the earth and on an economy. And so I think when having that urgency in mind, we tend to also deconstruct those. So in example, I participated in an exhibition where it was at the Van Abbe Museum by the Geodesign program created by Martina Muzzi, and it was all about deconstructing the cycles of the sand and understanding the impact that it has through certain ecosystems and certain companies. And I think while entering the education program, you also understand that there's an urge in stopping using certain if we talk about the most critical, sand, cement, and all this, I mean, you have to rebuild new ways of going forthcoming. And I think biodesign has that power to also sort of test through, sort of experiment and find new solutions within those constraints. If I answer well.
Thank you. This gives us a nice image, and we're going to talk further also because you have a really interesting exhibition coming up. Akil, with Resolve Collective, you address social challenges with architecture, engineering, technology, and art. How are you working on the climate crisis?
How are we working on the climate crisis?
And how will you solve it?
How am I going to solve it? I've actually got the solution. The problem is implementing the solution. I think everyone has the solution. I think we are quite clear on what's good and what's bad. And I was speaking earlier to Dirk and then later also to Olivier. And I feel like within many disciplines and industries, we suffer from the kind of weight of our own grandeur. And sometimes by kind of asserting these massive world-changing claims, we stop ourselves, we become inert in the challenge to do those things. We forget that actually our experience is a connection of different translocalities, and within those translocalities there are kind of quantum physical laws, things that work and make sense within our own neighborhoods, but make much less sense when you scale up in that kind of numerical sense. We do work translocally, so our work was inspired by where I grew up in the place called South London, between Brixton and Croydon, these two places which are pivotal places within the Afro-Caribbean diaspora in London. And when we started our studio, we were only working in this place. So we didn't have anything. We didn't have a car, we didn't have money, we didn't have any of these things. We just had an idea about working in our own local neighborhood and using local things and local resource and local knowledge and celebrating that. And that was the only thing we wanted to do. There wasn't a resolve, there wasn't a grand vision. And there were, and more pertinently, we weren't single, we weren't kind of special in that. We were surrounded by a huge milieu, a massive cloud of people who were just trying to do exactly the same thing. They were trying to fight injustice in the neighborhood. They were trying to work with one another. And it is that collective vision across localities that I've continued to see, regardless of where we're working, whether it be the north of the UK, whether it be elsewhere in Europe, whether it be across the world. These kind of local approaches and this translocalism, I really believe is this way in which we not only re-understand the idea of an answer, because we're using our disciplines to probe and to ask questions, we're using the creative disciplines to probe and to ask questions. But I see it as a way of re-understanding scale. It's re-understanding what it means to scale up, and actually instead I think what we're trying to do is scale in.
Very interesting, but scaling up is also important. How can we implement everything you said, what you've experienced, but also what you practice in South London? How can we do that in Rotterdam, for example? Or how can we do that in other parts of the Netherlands?
I think people are already doing it in Rotterdam and other parts of the Netherlands. I think that scaling up, I'm going to be really provocative. I think scaling up, we've already scaled up. We actually are at a planetary scale, and that's what's destroying the planet. So this idea of scaling up, I think, is not necessarily the question. It's not necessarily the difficult thing, because we have quite good mechanics in order to do this. The mechanisms of doing those are late capitalism, the way in which Dirk talked earlier about how we accumulate value. All of those things are very good mechanisms for scaling up. They're great. What we don't have is our mechanisms for scaling down, or a will to do that. We really don't have mechanisms that are working at much smaller scales. Industry, as we understand it, doesn't work like that. And if you take the building industry and construction industry, which is where my background is, there are some really interesting, at a small scale, problems that prevent anything from happening at small or large scales. Insurance, for example. Building insurance is what prevents most retrofits. And the greenest building are the buildings that are already made. And so, but our inability to do anything with those old buildings because of insurance has completely stopped being able to work in places which are vacant, deindustrialized towns which have suffered from vacancies. And so we have to take our inspiration from other things, from other scales. And there are artist collectives across the world. There are collectives of people who don't call themselves artists across the world who are doing that radical work. It does happen already. And so it's really about how we connect to one another, how we become inspired from one another.
Okay, thank you. Olivier, you're the Deputy Curator of the Perspective Design and Innovation Department at Centre Pompidou. Is it important for you that new design acquisitions address the climate crisis?
Yeah, so again, addressing the climate change through the acquisitions of a museum can sound a bit like a big tough mission. I would say, from our point of view, working on a museum collection would be to show the plurality of answers that are given by designers concerning a sustainable design. So once we have this task of defining which has pros and cons of defining what could be a sustainable design. We started to look at it and to understand that the approaches by designers are multiples and very various. And so I would say that from a design collection museum, this perspective was essential. So on our side, we've worked a lot, as I quickly said before, on biodesign. We have tried to prospect a lot of what was going on in the field of design in terms of biodesign. So we have looked at Dutch designers, for instance, which are very innovative, from the mycelium chair by Studio Clarenbeck and Dross, who's using fungi to make objects, to Teresa van Dongen research on electricity made and produced by microorganisms, or Studio Drift, which are very big names in design in the Netherlands. But
not the same Drift as where Dirk Loorbach
another
works.
Studio Drift, exactly, who has worked on swarm algorithms. So all of these aspects of biodesign was too interesting for us to see in design how knowledge on living system was shifting, how it was brought by the designer themselves. And it was also a challenge for a museum collection, since most of these artworks, so it was a very transversal research. And for instance, I could mention the crystal works that were made by Japanese artist Tokujin Yoshoka, which are made of crystal. Or I could also mention a bioprinter by Alison Kudla that entered the collection, which are artworks and design objects that are very much engaged in change processes, in living processes, which is definitely a challenge for a museum collection, which is supposed to last forever, which there's this fiction, if I can be provocative too, about what the task of a museum would be this everlasting collection. It's now also a question when we look at the status of objects, of biodesign objects, which are very relevant in terms of understanding this climate change. And there are other definitions of sustainable design. I will not list all of them, but we've worked on eco-design, which is also much more interested in the supply chain, designer that will take in charge the thinking of the whole supply chain, from the very material that can be taken in agricultural waste until the making of an object. And Studio Clarenbeck and Dross, for instance, has already integrated the idea of a disappearance of the objects. So that's also another challenge when I was mentioning the museum collection, the fact that these objects are impermanent, that they can change and in the end disappear. So yeah, I would say that's the way we've tried to understand, at least at first, what was going on in the design field and how all these responses were very complementary together.
Thank you. Henriette, do you think that governments and corporations include designers enough actually to tackle the big challenges that we're facing?
No.
No?
No. Yeah, it's something I struggle with a lot in my practice. I think it's very important. I think design fiction has a role to inspire, to show alternatives. But I think it's really important to implement in the real world that. That the knowledge and the courage and the curiosity and the skills of designers are used by government and corporations. I think there's there's a lack of testing. Like we need to figure out new things. It was mentioned here before, like how can we make like tests and experiments in the real world on a new kind of scale? And this is actually really something that artists, designers, and architects are really good at. And I think that can really help like catalyze also the transition. So yeah, I think that's very important. And then secondly, like when you look in the countryside where I work a lot, there's a complexity with the ecological transition at stake that is not really understood by the broader public. And I think also there, like, we have a big role to play, like to reach out. And
Because in your wetland projects in Ireland, you also work together with scientists, but also with farmers, with all kinds of different stakeholders as a designer and as an artist. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think was part of the success of the project was this construction of a very cross-disciplinary teams. So we're always like, even within the Atelier Luma team, we work with different expertise, like from engineers to biologists, architects, designers, but also, with people from the government, with farmers. So this mix, I think, is needed also to figure out things that can actually work and and something else I wanted to say is that it's a cultural transition and not only an ecological transition or like an agricultural transition. And I think often from when things are still approached by government or companies too much siloed, and I think there's a role for people like us.
A cultural transition, very, very interesting. So we have to look at this from a holistic perspective, I think. Leo, you're also an artist, designer artist. For you, maybe to tell us how can you grasp the immense task or subject of the ecological transition and global climate crisis in your own practice as an artist, as a creative?
Well, I feel like taking back what Akil says, it's about slowing down somehow. So when you consider the idea of producing, you're already somehow going against the idea of an eco transition, because the idea of producing something involves like materiality, it involves energy and everything. So when I think about producing, I also think that there's seasons, there's ways that energies are flowing. So I, in my practice, started to slow down a little bit into the way I consume those energies. So I tend to look at geolocalization and how things around affect. So for example, UV lights will help to dry instead of like using heaters. So there's like 8 months of the year where I can really work, and then 4 months of the year where I cannot, and I'm not gonna go against it also. So I'm not trying to like overheat the thing, making work that are valuable and things like that. I actually step down and I reflect and I research and I do all this. And talking about how this can connect to corporations and institutions, I think there's this gap also sometimes in trying to have the help from governments or from institutions into supporting those practices. So as an artist, you tend to like make the work and think the work and all this creative process, but you also don't necessarily always have the time to really reflect on looking where all these opportunities and the help from the governments. You're more like focused on a community base. You're more focused on creating that energy around the studio or around the artist. So it's difficult to make the connection between them, but they are here. If you start looking, there's also so many open calls that are tackling like the ecological transition that needs to happen, and we talked about that in the last debate. So I think it's about focusing also on this and mapping also how all this sort of like help are around there, because there's so many. So one example is in France we have like a database called Frappe, and every week there's like, I don't know, maybe 10 offers about new studios, new open calls, new price. And I think these are also ways, if people are aware of them, then you can sort of like map all the possibilities that you can create. But it's not necessarily the effort that you have, because there's that slowing down process that needs to happen. So by slowing down, you can also start like concentrating on those energies.
Could Institut Français play a role in helping with that?
There's plenty. There's Institut Français, there's the DRAC, the FRAC, working on a more international, regional or local base. So I've, through my studio, which I also run as an artist-run space, I try every year to re-implement some of my time through supporting other artists. So I always try to do like open calls, finding public money for it, but it takes a lot of the time also. So it's not necessarily only through the public institution, it's also through the help of private institutions that it can happen, but then there's that contradiction on where corporates also have like that negative impact in that brainwashing, greenwashing effect also. So it's deconstructing the map of all this.
Yeah, thank you. Akil, should social designers and socially engaged artists be activists too?
No, I don't think so. No. I think that the mantle of an activist, firstly, I think is maybe part of this a kind of 20th century language, and the role of language, I think, the role of designers, I think, is also an important as a linguistic exercise, because when it comes to thinking about the terms that we're going to use to address a ecological transition or a culturally ecological transition, I don't suppose we can use the same linguistic tools that created the problem. And so in a dismantling of what those things are, I do feel like there's a kind of sacredness to this idea of the activist, or to the mantle or the title of the activist, which sometimes causes more frictions than is useful, equally to the mantle of the designer. And I don't think there should be an obligation on socially engaged designers to be activists or vice versa. I think the obligation is to see what is between those two positions and to try and broach those things. And so collectivity, which was talked about in the first panel, is obviously a really important part to play in those types of things. Whether or not we charge and task everyone with having to be this and having to be that, I'm not sure how useful that might be.
And if we can elaborate on that, do you think that and I'm also curious what you think, but starting with you, that individual designers or artists can make the same impact, because we're talking about scale, as bigger organizations or institutions in making a change?
Sorry, it's going to seem like I'm not answering your questions directly, but it kind of I guess it just depends on what you talk about impact. And to reintroduce this idea of scale and why scale doesn't necessarily just need to be something linear, scaling up or scaling down. There is a different sort of impact that individual artists can have to what organizations and institutions can have. And a recognition of that impact, I think, and to renew language around how we recognize the value in a diversity of impacts, a plurality of impacts, in fact, I think is the objective.
Yeah, and of course I don't mean carbon impact, but I mean like social, good, positive impact. I'm wondering, maybe you can give an example, like a social designer who changed something that we can learn from also here.
So I suppose in the context of impact, we work within what we call a kind of broader ecology of practices around the UK, all of which are looking at liberation, at social justice, but also the climate crisis. Some of them are Skin Deep Magazine, Maya, who work in Birmingham, Healing Justice, and Civic Square. There's also a group called Dark Matter Labs, who maybe some people are familiar with. They're underneath a much broader umbrella called Architecture 00. They very recently published a platform for labour contracts. So it's a platform which helps automate labour contracts depending on the kind of conditions of the small organisation. It's a really important part of the substructures or the infrastructures that allow for the work to be done which isn't talked about or celebrated or funded. And it is those tools that I think are part of how we address a much broader and interlinked crisis around the climate. I think that there are administrative violences which precipitate the climate crisis. I think there are small and boring and bureaucratic violences which allow these things to permeate. And actually, we must turn our creativity towards those things just as equally as we must turn our creativity towards direct action. I think those things are really important.
Direct action. Maybe Henriette, the question if individual designers can make the same positive impact in changing culture, changing the mindset of society, changing behavior of people, because that's necessary. You said cultural transition. Can you give us some good examples?
Yeah, I think, of course, like the problems are global. Like the crisis is very big, but I think there are different problems, like locally, and then that can be addressed by designers. As an example, I'm working on a book about water. And of course, we need like big and engineered solutions in the Netherlands. But then at the same time, if you look at water problems on a smaller scale, there's, for instance, thousands and thousands of dams and that block like fish life in the Netherlands. And then if from a government level, there's fish passages integrated, but then if you look at that at the local level, they don't work, for instance, to give an example. And then there's work to be done. And I think, it's about skill is an interesting thing, and I don't think like solving problems or working on things on a smaller scale is less important.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about the upcoming exhibition, Olivier, that you are making, Design Sediments. It's coming up in a couple of months. Can you tell us a little bit more about the project? You're co-creating it, of course, with Leo.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So Design Sediments is an exhibition we'll curate together with Leo. That will happen, as you can see, in Iden Club in Rotterdam from January 21st to March 24th. So with this exhibition, we wanted to gather around 15 designers and artists that are working on, let's say, the contemporary dimensions of sedimentation, geology, and perhaps other than human timescales. We were inspired by a specific term that we borrowed from French philosopher Michel Serres, which is the concept of polychrony. Polychrony is this possibility of a coexistence of multiple times within subjects, indeed, within life and living processes, but also within objects themselves, within their matter, within the identity of the materials. So looking at objects from this perspective of an assemblage of matter and materials that in a way extend the time dimensions of the objects. So that's why if we can go to the slide afterwards, we can have just a few ideas of the kind of artworks and objects we wanted to show in this exhibition. And some of them are very much involved in change processes, just like the archaeological objects by Marcin Russak that I think we see in another slide. Some others would refer to a phenomenon, geological phenomenon like erosion, indeed with experiments from Studio Does That or from MBL architects. And we have also artworks and objects that were made with the collaborations of insects. That's the case of Marlène Huissou that you can see right there. Marlène Huissou has been working for 10 years on a material that is made from insects waste and has been talking a lot about this time dimension that is completely reconfigured when working with other species indeed. And so it's this insects leather, that's how she called it, that will be presented through this sculpture.
Nice, and Basse, who also gave a workshop, is also...
Exactly. That we can see here, with the Linen research.
Leo, do you want to add something?
There's also, through the exhibition, we wanted to also show how a multidisciplinary approach is put up front and creates a further impact in understanding that transition that happens. And I think through showing artists that do films, artists that experiment in labs, designers that do biodesign, or artists that speculates also. There's that different approach and different research that happens. So for example, filmmakers will do field trips, will be able to investigate within communities, within field trips and professionals of certain fields. So for example, Naime Perez, she went into several sort of mining fields, and directly through encouraging like discourse to the people, is able to understand a little bit how she can deconstruct like the cycles of certain materials and the problematic that are encountered through mining, whether it's charcoal, whether it's sand, and materiality that goes around it. And on top of that, there's also like designers that are continuously experimenting and collaborating with scientists, and I think that's also in the merging of disciplines, going out of like a creative practice, also how you can incorporate like other fields of interest, for example, science, biology, to give up like all the knowledge that there's through different fields. I think that's going to enrich your project and give them a deeper context and a deeper outcome also.
That's what also the same method of Henriette actually, or it resembles a little bit your practice. Yeah, the interdisciplinary methoding. Thank you. We're very curious about the exhibition. What do you hope that people will take away?
I think one hope is also to open up possibilities on how you can explore materiality. So you don't necessarily have to like work in convention materials, but you can continuously explore and finding new ways to approach them. For example, work locally, work with leftovers, byproducts, create biopolymers. So you can continuously open up fields of experiment and explore maybe solutions somehow. So opening up a bit maybe the younger generation, and also giving hope into the possibility of collaborating within different fields. Sometimes I feel like there's a gap between different fields, so I think it's encouraging that also.
Yeah, Olivier?
Yeah, if I may add something, yeah, it's true that the artists and designers that we wanted to show that are working either in the Netherlands or in France mainly, from a humble perspective of making an exhibition, we just wanted to show what was going on in this young generation. That is a generation that is already very much embedded in collaborations with art and science. And it made sense indeed to have this in the Netherlands, where a network of schools and universities are very important. And I would just say that this perspective was also interesting for us to how can I say that? Just the fact that, sorry. That's
okay.
That's okay.
Thank you. When you see this, what do you think?
It's great. I'd love to come.
You. You can
come back to Rotterdam. Yeah, let's see if the audience has maybe a question or remark, because we still have some time. Is there somebody? Yeah, from the back. Okay, let's take a walk. I feel that my leg is a little bit asleep. I don't know how it comes, but maybe sitting. But I will come to you. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I also asked a question previously. I'm MA, I'm an urban designer, and I work a lot with materials as well. And I think it's really interesting. And I was also wondering, last week I went to this exhibition and the artists started using AI and virtual reality in their work. And I was curious about your opinion on this digitization, which is kind of the opposite maybe of materiality. So yeah, your view on that.
Olivier, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, it's usual that in a way it has been many times opposite. Like the digital field has been often put in opposite to, let's say, natural processes. And what we can see in the creation of designers and artists is that they bring together different type of tools that can find a common ground in some ways. We were mentioning Klarenbeck and Ross. I think it's interesting because they hybridize 3D printing with a very local perspective by thinking of the whole supply chain within 25 kilometers, from the growth of algae to the production of a small-scale series of objects with 3D printed printings and printers until the disappearance of the object itself. So I don't see this as necessarily opposite tools, and since The digital cultures and fields are already there. IA is already there, and it will be more and more here. It can be taken in charge by these creators also in thinking a new way about the living, because the living is now defined, there's multiple definitions that can be given to the living. This can be traced back from the 19th century, where we could not define what a crystal is. Would it be living or not, since it has the same processes of change as the living, but it's actually a mineral. So there's also a multiplicity of perspective that can be given to what is nature, what is the living. Is nature a fiction? And I would say that digital tools or IA or other agencies that are digital can participate in enlarging this vision.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very clearly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see from a different perspective if there are any other remarks or questions from the audience. Otherwise, we have time for some other questions to Akil. Akil, if you could give a recommendation, you know, and I'm also a little bit pressing the point of change making, but if you could give a recommendation to everybody here about change making, what would you recommend? If you want to change your practice because you're so inspired by everything you heard now.
How could I recommend everyone in the audience to change their own practices? Mm-hmm. I don't know their practices. I'd have to find out what that is first and then maybe make that recommendation. Perhaps I can be less facetious and recommend, if I was to think about a recommendation for myself as a result of today, because I had the privilege of being in a very beautiful workshop by Fanny Noel, and I think that the panel talk earlier was also very interesting and quite riveting. And I think taking on from that, I have been personally inspired to think about how we can connect with other practitioners within remits like this, so within talks and within symposiums, but in ways which create solidarity between those practitioners and like working avenues towards collaborative practices. I think so often there are moments like this where we're galvanized and we feel like there's an enthusiasm that's shared by everyone in the room, and we then try and we leave and that becomes nothing. We go back to our jobs, we go back to our practices, we go back to our exhibitions, we go back to our students, and life just kind of continues. But how do opportunities like this create these kind of steadfast avenues of collaboration? How do we create infrastructure out of these moments, and so that artists like myself and Fanny and Olivier and Leo and everyone else can come together as a result of this in solidarity with one another in these kind of real meaningful moments and start to think and to scheme, you know, to conspire. And I think those are really, conspiracy for me is one better than collaboration. How do we become co-conspirators? How do events like this generate co-conspirators? I think that's a really inspiring part of the thing for me. That's why I recommend for myself.
Okay. Do you think that cocktails play a part in creating the conspiracy?
Definitely.
Leo, do you have a recommendation? If we want to change our practices, because change, maybe it has to start with ourselves, what would that be?
I think for me, it always goes to knock at the door of the neighbor, because then you start opening up discussions in local perimeters. I'll give an example. I had, I don't know, for the 5 years I live in the countryside of Paris. There's that producer of linen next door, and he's never wanting me to welcome me in the industry, understand the production processes of linen, because he produces for animals, he produces for textiles, he produces for isolation materials, and so I always wanted to deconstruct a little bit how we wear, how we use. And I think by just sometimes knocking at the door, pushing, you can understand a bit more how things are running just along your perimeter. And you don't need to go further out to understand. It's just around the corner sometimes.
Just around the corner, pushing on the door, knocking on the door. Thank you. A great example also. Henriette.
I was just thinking about a project I developed in the Luma context called Footprint, which is about regional food production, but also kind of distributed, you see some images, distributed idea of like, so you can do this design of the shoe in one region. Here you see an example of the south of France, but what if you take it to another place, like the same design, and then exchange with people there? So it's a different like kind of grow model. But what was really interesting for me in this Mediterranean context is that the Middle East and African design scenes and Europe are not so well connected, and it's actually really interesting to exchange. It's interesting neighbors actually to exchange with, and I think it's.
And what can we learn from them?
Well, there's just other similar landscapes, but different culture, like other techniques. So they just do have other solutions, and you can learn from that. It's different ways of doing, and I mean, not that here all designers do the same, but they're better connected, so they know from each other. And I think, it's important to be conscious, like who's your group, who do you exchange with, like, and similar in an academic context, like when we curate the group for each year, we really think about, okay, what are the skills of the group and how can these people learn from each other and how can they learn as a group? Because as an individual, it's quite hard to learn, so you learn from others. And then another thing I was thinking of is as a maybe advice or like to the group is I think it's very important to work on your emotional connection with nature, and to do that like on a kind of daily basis, and to be conscious like what part on the earth or which place do I want to really care for. So I think that's very important, because then we just need to work on connections to each other, but also connections to the landscape.
It reminds me of the workshop of Klaas Koutenbrouw, very interesting about the Zoop model, a little bit. But we see Klaas later on also on stage for a wrap-up of the workshops. Klaas, did you know? All the workshop leaders. That's a surprise. But Olivier, do you have recommendations for us when we really want to make change in our practices starting tomorrow?
Yeah, I think just like that, what has been said, I would not recommend things on practices I don't know yet. But from my perspective, what I know is that the freedom in making is essential, and I would say that keeping this part of freedom is essential, even in negotiating what is collaborative, what is local, etc. When we look at the history of design, or the history of like designers, what they have produced over the years, we can see that by keeping trace of freedom, they had like brilliant ideas that came all around the way, all on the way. So when we did this exhibition at the Centre Pompidou-Metz, which was on a kind of mimesis, it was called, which was looking at the notion of nature in the history of design, we could see that already in the avant-garde, the notion of morphogenesis, this obsession for living growth and these processes was present in photographic tools, were inspiring designers in the forms they were making for objects. And this is something that came back in the 2000s with the digital turn and digital design, trying to produce objects that would not only mimic but integrate these morphogenetic processes inside the object. So I think these are brilliant ideas that just comes from a certain part of freedom, and that would be the only advice. And I would just end with this. Sadly, yesterday, Andrea Branzi passed away. He's a very important theorist, designer, I would say one of the most important designers and theorists of the second half century. He started from what is called the radical architecture movement in the 60s, which was this explosion of freedom in making, in creativity, in creation. And in a way, in museums, in institutions, we keep on looking back at this period, at this time period. This is something that we can question as well. But why are we so obsessed by what was made in that time? And also Andrea Bronzi had like those brilliant ideas in the 80s of reconnected with the objects in a sort of animistic connection to objects, in talking about caring for objects that would give back a service then, and this set of objects he made, the Animali Domestici, was all about the spirits of objects, and something that we can see coming back nowadays. So Bronzi was a good example of, I think, those brilliant free ideas that emerged.
So read one of his books. Could be a summarization of your recommendation.
A summarization of this?
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I gave that by making a little joke, but read one of his books. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Sorry,
So yeah, okay. Excellent. Thank you so much, esteemed panel, for all your insights. I think it's good you stay around a little bit so everybody can talk maybe one-on-one to you if you have any other things that you want to share. But give them a warm applause. Olivier Zetoun, Henriette Waal, Leo Ochta and Akil Scafé-Smith. Yeah, and then we want to invite back on stage for a last roundup of the workshops, the workshop leaders. You can just sit around here because then we have everybody here and that's even more cozier. But yeah, give Klaas Kuitenbrouwer, we want to see you back again. Fanny Noël, Basse Stitgen and Liv Vasberg. Please, a round of applause for the workshop leaders. Yeah, guys, if you want to stand over here, then we're very, very curious what your takeaways are from the different workshops that you gave. Klaas, what would that be?
I'd like to make a connection between what we did in the workshop and the things you said. Actually, some of you addressed, and I think the whole. Okay, if I would to summarize it, and I'm using the language that we developed through doing the ZOOP model, it's basically reading your own practice as an ecological practice. So you are already doing an ecological practice, but maybe you're not just doing it in such a way that it sustains all the other bodies that are part of this ecological practice. I think this is what you're talking about. It's deeply relational, and like all stuff you touch, all stuff you do touches all other bodies in particular relations, and your let's say, so this, okay, I'm taking it as a question to another recommendation. My recommendation would be from the ZOOP model is take yourself serious as an ecological practitioner, no matter what it is you do. And then the question is how, and then basically step by step, process by process, intervention by intervention, you can begin to develop an attitude, a practice of care that makes you a healthy body in an ecosystem. I think this is the, let's say, it is indeed, so scale is then something that follows from a lot of people that do this at the same time. The idea that we can scale up a small practice to a large practice is this, let's not go there. Scale has different logic, has all different scales. This is the industrial reduction, price reduction by reducing all this imaginary noise, which is actually actual people, actual bodies that then can become roadkill. We don't want to go there again.
No, we want to scale up the scaling in. That was actually...
Scale out is another word that's used. Yeah, scale out or scale in. But scale up, like as though like scale doesn't matter. No. I mean, so ecological practice, taking care of the relationships that your body forms with other bodies, that those bodies form with other bodies. And by extension, the planetary in the end is entirely involved.
Thank you so much, Klaas Kuitenbrouwer. Fanny. Can you also give your recommendation of the day or your takeaway? What have you learned?
I'm really happy about the group that we had because I think the workshop was about how can you intervene in your hyper-local situation by making a garden, however. But the workshop took the form of an open exchange between all the participants. And I learned a lot from the participants as much as I think the participants learn from each other. And at the core, this is a bit what I wanted to bring into into the light, that things are happening outdoor just here, and also like here in the very close relationship we can make with other people. So yeah, it was about gardening, but it was also about human.
Thank you, Fanny Noël. Liv?
So our workshop was everybody got a role and had to choose an event. So we traveled to Beirut and had a design fair. Then we had an amazing music festival that I really want to attend. And then we had the Rijksacademie that went super local. And it was interesting, so everybody got a different hat. So artists were not allowed to be artists, but artists became the audience, became venue managers. And so they all got a paper and had to brainstorm how you can limit actually take responsibility, understand what you're doing. And what was interesting, it was a very short, people had 20 minutes to prepare, but in 20 minutes came with so great ideas, but also some of them you're like, good idea, but that brings actually a bad idea. So one thing brings another thing and brings another thing that shows the complexity as in running an event, how you can be as sustainable as possible. So it was also about raising consciousness about those difficulties, brainstorm together as a team and get also a different role at different hats. So that was also very fruitful, I hope, for the participant as well, workshop.
Thank you so much, Liv Vasberg, of Houden Club and Collectibles and much more. Basse.
Thanks. So in our workshop we did, material research. That was the starting point, and that also led into a conversation of how those new materials could be introduced into an educational framework and into education institutions. And I will keep it very short. I think one of the conclusions was that we say to embrace impermanence rather than to fear it.
That's a great one-liner. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this program. But before we start with cocktails, maybe we want to express some last thought with you. And that is actually the hope that the speakers of today have inspired you to make a change in your practice, in your daily lives. Because together we can change the world. We're still very optimistic here in Rotterdam. But the time is now more than ever. That's also very, very true. So like Greta Thunberg already said, once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then and only then hope will come. With that takeaway, I want to leave you, but not before thanking everybody who was involved in this program. So one more big applause for all our speakers of today. David Bayard, Ari Chen, Errol Ok, Liv Vasberg, Dirk Loorbach, Musoke Nalwoga, Klaas Kuitenbrouwer, Fanny Noël, Basse Stitgen, Henriette Waal, Akil Scafé-Smith, Olivier Zetoun, Leo Orta. And also a big applause for the great team of the Nieuwe Instituut. Marianne Zouniak, Flora van Gaden, Reineke Otten, Anne Toupam, Sonar Arslan, Shedley Bonifacia, the guys upstairs from the technique. And also, of course, of Institut Français, Sophie Chartier, Bernadette Sarriard, Eva Monnier, Pascal Villa, Isabelle Rosé, and Tiffaine Lefeuvre. And thank you all for coming.